Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and this video I'm going to address one of the things that I've been asked in the comments down below quite a lot, and that is the coding conventions I use in C# and why I use them. Now, this is a heavily opinionated topic, and there is no right or wrong. What I want to convey through this video is the idea of a reason for something to exist. So, for example, things like method names and class names are written in Pascal case. This is widely accepted in C#, that's the standard. But there are some things that are way more opinionated than others, and those are the topics that I want to talk about. Mainly because I feel that no matter what you choose to end up picking, having a story or having an idea to back it up really helps to convey that convention. And you'll see what I mean as I start going through the project that I have in front of me. So what you see now in front of your screen is not how I would structure a project. It's just me throwing stuff in a project so I can talk about it section by section, but that's about it. Don't think that this is how I would structure a project. If you like this type of content and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell to get alerted when I upload a new video. So let me start from the very beginning, the very top, which is when I create a solution, I like to have 3 top level folders. Sometimes just 2, depending on what type of project I have. If it's a library, I always have a samples project as well. If it's not, then I only have source and tests. But the idea is you have this top level separation in both a physical and a solution folder approach, where then you can split the actual source code by the tests at a very high level and collapse them. And then again, at the very high level, how I like to do things is I have the project name, and then when I'm writing tests for that, I would have the project name .tests. And if I have more than one type of test, or if I want to specify what type of tests I have, I would say unit tests, acceptance tests, integration tests. So I would also specify that in the project. And then another small thing is that when I'm creating my test classes, I usually, especially in unit testing, I have one class per class that I'm testing. And in that scenario, just by the name, you can see that this is the unit test class for the general guidelines class. And if I click on that, I name my things very specifically. So I have a private read-only of the type that I'm testing called _SUT or system under test. And then the way I like to name things is method name that I'm testing in that system under test, and then should do something when a condition is satisfied. And this is how far I will go related to testing, because I actually have a video coming about testing where I have integration, acceptance, and unit testing, and I mix all those together. So that's as far as I want to talk about this. And with that out of the way, let's go to the more high-level things. So first things first, there's 2 approaches in which I do folders. One is I use folders by domain, and the other thing is I folder by concept when the domain is very narrow. What do I mean by that? Well, you can see that here I have things like models and services. This is when you create folders by concept, the concept of the services, the concept of the models. But I generally recommend using the domain, for example, users or payments, or I don't know, the domain ideas. The problem with that approach sometimes is that the domain is so narrow that you're better off using concept to make folders, just because your whole domain is users, and you just can't have everything on that high level and just make a users folder just because you want to follow an arbitrary rule. So in general, I folder by domain when I can. If the domain is very narrow, I folder by concept. And then folder pluralization is another thing, where sometimes you're using something like services, sometimes you name something like user. And why do I do that? Well, I like the idea of pluralizing by the idea behind the folder name. For example, this folder will store services. It won't store a service or the domain of a service, the idea of a service. So for that reason, I'm going to name it services. However, if the folder underneath called user is just storing things related to the user domain, then I'm going to name it user, not users. So there's that. And if I have classes or things that are very internal to a specific package or a specific project, then I would have a folder called internal. Microsoft is doing that a lot as well. And I would put internal stuff in there. I wouldn't expose it if they're not needed somewhere else. However, this kind of violates the concept thing I talked about. So if you have a very narrow scope, you don't have to do this. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the classes, right? So I usually separate the interface by the class, but this is a thing I go back and forth all the time. Sometimes if the interface is small, I just have it in a single class. Sometimes I split it. It's something that's very fluid in my mind, so it depends on how I feel. But one thing I feel strongly about is the idea that if something is awaitable, then it should have an async suffix. So in this scenario, the get by ID is awaitable. By having the async suffix, the story behind this idea is that the user using it doesn't need to see, oh, is this a task? Is it something I need to await? They automatically know, yes, I'm gonna await this because it's async. And that's that. The exception for that is things that your code doesn't need to explicitly call. An example would be an action in a controller. You're not calling the action in the controller yourself. The framework is mapping it and calling it. So in that case, I wouldn't actually have async suffix there. The other thing is some parallelization examples. For example, you have an enum or you have a static class with a constant or static read-only fields. And here's an idea separation. For enums, I don't parallelize. So I say response status code, not response status codes. The idea behind that is that you're only representing one code at a time. However, when it comes down to static classes with static read-only fields or constants, I will parallelize because the class now is actually storing codes. It doesn't represent one code. The code is represented by a type, but the class itself should be parallelized. Now, another thing which is highly debatable is the idea of using var everywhere. So I tend to use var a lot, and my logic behind it is that I don't really need to know the type most of the time. I mean, I also use writer, so if I just press control, it shows me the type. If I need it on demand, I can understand that if you're looking at code, or let's say on GitHub, you don't actually get that. So that's absolutely fine if you want to specify it, but I personally don't have to because at least me and the team I work with are very good at naming things very well. So yeah, this is a user ID and I can say it's a GUID. And even if that was extracted, still the thing that it's named user ID when I'm just reading code, do I care about the type? No, I care that this is a user ID. So I don't feel like I have to specify that this is a GUID user ID. That being said, you could have value objects or other things where you have an implicit operator. An implicit operator will take the type and then can automatically convert it to a different type. So in that scenario, user type, I have to do .value to actually get the GUID behind it. But if I comment those out, I would also do GUID directly. And now let me just remove that as well and give it a G here so I can separate it. As you can see now, this is the same object, still user ID, but here you have user ID dot value. So you have to go through the value to get the type. But because I have also an implicit operator in that user ID, I can get the GUID directly. So in that scenario, yes, I do actually use the explicit type instead of saying var, but this is a smaller use case. Ultimately, whatever works better for you. Another thing is the class ordering, and this is the thing I'm getting asked a lot, and I'm gonna address it here. So how should I order my things in a class, like everything? So I don't really follow this 100% of the time, but here's how I order them and here's how I name them. For static read-only things or for constants, I have Pascal case and they go at the top. And then I have my private read-only fields and they follow the underscore and then a camel case. And I do that instead of this dot or not having it at all or m underscore, just because it tells a nice story. And the story is, I can see just from a glance, and let me just change this so you can see what I mean. If this was user service and I did this dot, then if I use this user service somewhere here, and let's say this method was quite big, I don't know if it's a global or class level variable or if it's a method level variable. So the idea behind having the underscore is that by having some indication, then I can easily see that yes, if I'm using it all the way down here with the underscore, then I know it's class level. That's the idea behind it. And the reason why I'm not using m underscore is just because m, which stands for my, I think, is a bit of an older approach, so it's not really relevant anymore. Then I have my constructor, then I have my finalizer, and then I have delegates, events, properties, public methods, internal methods, protected methods, and private methods. And the logic behind this is that delegates, events, and properties are less dense, so they're easier to see. And then public methods, because their visibility is public, it means that we should probably have them higher, just because you're most likely to take a look at them. And then internal, because internal is again project-wide but within the package. And then protected and private based on how much they're exposed to the outside of this class, and that's the logic behind it. Now, do I follow those 100% of the time? No, not really. But this is how I roughly try to do things. And then general guidelines. I generally match my folder structure with my namespace. This isn't really true when I'm trying to do cheeky things. For example, if I'm building a package, a NuGet package, and I want to allow you to use my DI extensions without having you use a using statement for my NuGet package, then I would name my namespace Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. And the reason for that is that it will automatically detect it as if it was native to .NET. But I generally like to match them. Then my class name matches the file name for the class. I have the underscore in the beginning, like I mentioned before. Async suffix, async await stuff, basic. For public methods, I usually, almost always, I have a method summary, especially for packages and things that other people, maybe company-wide, will use. Controllers are kind of excluded, mainly because depending on what we're using, for example, you might be using Swagger. Yes, then have them, because you can take those and have them as description in the Swagger interface. But ultimately, you want the summary to be there for somebody calling the method. If it's just there for you to see it, it basically ends up being a comment. You're supposed to help somebody calling it. Then, in general, I try to use is and is not for null checks. And like I've said in the else video, I prefer early return than if else and single exit point. That's purely preferential. You don't have to follow any of this. And with that said, that's all the basic top level coding conventions that I use in C#. And I hope I conveyed the idea that the reason why I use them is the story behind it. What the thing itself is doesn't matter, what the convention is. What matters is to have a story you can communicate to all the team members, and everybody can be on the same page. And just by looking at the code, they know what is what. The underscore, for example, is a great example of that, or the async suffix. That's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my patrons for making these videos possible. If you want to support me as well, you're going to find the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you like this video, subscribe for more content like this, and ring the bell as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.